The problems that I faced growing up didn't occur to me as actually being problems. They just seemed like they were normal, I guess.
I kept having people tell me that I was fine and that nothing was wrong and that I was making stuff up.
I don't think they understood how, not just how big of an issue, but what the issue really was. And the issue wasn't that I was hurting myself. The issue was that I was so upset and so depressed that I resorted to hurting myself because I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone.
They responded to all my signs by just telling me to get over it.
I would make it obvious that I wasn't okay, but they never followed up.
Because everyone was telling me that I should have been okay, and I was trying to be, and I couldn't be, and I felt like a failure and that I couldn't do anything right.
They would punish me, like, you know, if you cut yourself again, you don't get to go to summer camp. Or if you cut yourself again, you don't get to go to the Simple Plan concert. You know, we're both things that happen among, you know, others. Like, you know, you don't get to hang out with your friends.
I don't know whether my parents didn't do anything because they just didn't want to, or that they didn't know, or whether it was too hard for them to face, or what it was. I really thought they just didn't care.
I think my parents felt that they didn't want anything to be wrong with me, so that they didn't raise a child who was messed up. They didn't want to accept the fact that I wasn't okay.
I was sure that they knew what was wrong and that they just didn't want to do anything about it because it didn't matter enough.
I'm not sure if they were trying or if they just didn't want to, but I needed the help that I wasn't getting.
One night, I was on the verge of attempting suicide, and somebody knew about it and called my parents, and my parents didn't do anything about it. My parents didn't come in and check on me. They didn't say anything. They didn't even say anything the next day. Like, they didn't do anything, even when all of those things were brought directly to their attention.
I think my parents, you know, they always wanted the best for me, and, you know, they definitely didn't want me to not recover, but I think they just, in a way, didn't want to believe it was as much of an issue as it was.
I think that generally, when a parent finds out that their child is suffering from depression or self-harming, they like to think that it's just a phase, that it's not a real issue, that it's something that they can ignore because they don't want to face it. Nobody wants to face that their child is unhappy and hurting themselves, but it happens, and it happens a lot more than we would like to admit. Deal with the issue rather than ignore it and push it off and tell their children that they're doing the wrong thing, and that's what a lot of us got.
These are the stories we set out to tell. We want to start a new conversation about stigmas surrounding depression in teenagers. We put out a call for others to contribute their experiences, and we couldn't have imagined the journey it would take us on.
My name is Jessie Minor.
Molly Hudelson.
Blaine.
Jessica Reed.
Sarah Tomlinson.
Aimee Bender.
Piatt.
Behe.
Anthony Vonelli.
Aimee Cramer.
Toni Mazzariello.
Ragosta.
Angela Landis.
Laurel Wenson.
I'm Laurette Johnson-Presto with my husband Jim.
My name is Tworkowski. I'm the founder of To Write Love on Her Arms. The statistic that really has stayed with me over the years was the one that said that 2 out of 3 people who struggle with depression never get help for it.
I never sought any kind of help from adults or family or anything like that. I didn't want them to tell me that I was crazy, because I didn't feel crazy, and I felt like whenever I stopped to think about my own worries or insecurities, I was worried about what people would say, and so I didn't want them to condemn me for what I was doing.
There is a tremendous stigma, and I think there's shame and confusion that kind of hovers over this conversation and just keeps it quiet, keeps it from happening. And I think we're afraid of being labeled, we're afraid of being judged, we're afraid of being misunderstood.
Everyone knows somebody that's taken their life, there's no question. And I remember in college, I remember getting the news that somebody had taken their life, and it was somebody I never would have expected would kill themselves. I'm amazed at the people that can just turn away and say, you know, I don't want to get involved. Or maybe they're afraid to get involved. Maybe they're afraid they don't know how to deal with it. I don't know.
I remember back in school, and I went to a huge high school, one kid in the 4 years I was there committed suicide. It was not something that, we were stunned because no one did that. So I think that is part of it. Suicide has become much more culturally accepted in teens as almost the final coping strategy or lack of being able to cope.
Suicide, as anybody grew up, I mean...
You didn't talk about it.
You didn't talk about it. You were to be, that was a...
It's a big secret.
That was, it was an embarrassment to the family if you lost somebody due to suicide. It was, you were a coward if you committed suicide. Those are all the things I remember.
There was no, that I knew of, counseling. There was no hotline that I could call other than seeing what was derogatorily referred to as a shrink. So far as I know, there was no such thing as a support system. Maybe it existed, but I didn't have access to it.
I think people still assume that there's something defective with you when you have a mental illness. Something is severely wrong, you're untrustworthy, you know, you're dangerous. And that's usually not the case. Like 99% of the time, that is not the case.
I think a lot of parents take it personally. They might take it as an insult on their own parenting skills. They might be afraid. Again, in a previous generation, mental illness was not discussed. It was a matter of shame, something to be hidden. And it's really important, I think, right now to change that attitude in today's parents, to understand that you would treat a mental illness the same way you would treat another illness. You wouldn't keep a diabetic home and not give them insulin because you're embarrassed.
I think a lot of times as people, we're afraid of what we don't understand. And so we do hear those stories of young people who don't get the care that they need and deserve because the parents are afraid, or the parents in a way sweep it under the rug and say it's not a big deal, or say, you know, no, you don't need that kind of help. Maybe they even think it's a reflection on them.
I think that a lot of the struggling children tend to feel they need to hide their suicidal thoughts or their self-harm from their parents is really because both are taboo subjects. They know that there's no parent is going to be really excited to say, oh, terrific, you know, yeah. So there's the fear of the reaction. Are they going to scream? Are they going to cry? Are they going to care at all? I think that's a really valid fear for some of these kids who feel that no one cares.
It's so hard to generalize in a certain situation as to whether or not it's always the parent's fault. I guess that's where I'm kind of going from. You really have to look at it case by case. But there are clear-cut, definite situations where a parent's lack of care and concern would definitely cross that line, especially if, God forbid, the child ended up taking their own life.
They're asking for help, they're aware that they need help, and their parent or guardian is not allowing that. And so I do think there comes a time when you just have to speak up, and you have to be honest with another adult, with someone you can go to who you trust.
I think one of the hardest things for me to see in all the kids that I work with is that there are so many that are really, truly, in a sense, trapped in their environment. Most of the kids that I talk to can be anywhere between the ages of 12 and 16, 17 years old. And because they're minors, the reality is they're going to be living in this home for anywhere between 2 to 5 years before they can walk out the door and be an adult and find their own way. That's really, in the eyes of a teenager, you know, 4 or 5 years is a really, really long time. And in the eyes of a depressed teenager, it's eons, because you can't see past the pain that you're in to the fact that things will get better.
I cannot count how many I've talked to who have gone through this, and they've been like, my parents, whenever I tell them about this, they're like, they lock down and they don't let me do anything, and they treat me like I'm insane, and it's like living in an asylum with people who don't even care.
I think sometimes it's easier to sidestep it, pretend you don't see it. You know, yeah, he's a teenager, he's just got a bad attitude. It's not about being a teenager and having a bad attitude. It's about being a teenager and you being his mom or dad, and you need to pay attention to what's going on in your house.
A kid who is, you know, 14, 15 years old, who is screaming out for, I need treatment, I need antidepressants, I need something, and their parents aren't just saying, it'll pass, you know, what's going to happen to that parent if that child doesn't get the help they need and they finally take their own life? I think of it that way. It's like, then okay, were you responsible for your child's death by neglecting that? And from our perspective, if you're not doing anything to help your kid, we would have loved that opportunity.
There wasn't
we don't
anything
have
we
that
would...
opportunity anymore. And if your child's in crisis, and to the point of voluntary or involuntary treatment, there should be no other option, because as a parent, it's our belief. We were given the gift of life with these children. They are not here for us. We are here for them. If they are in crisis of any kind, it is our responsibility to do the very best we can. And if somebody comes in, if one of your children come and blatantly tell you what they're thinking, it is our responsibility as parents to do everything possible to get them the help that they deserve.